What is the Hebrew word for God? Hi, everyone. Welcome to Language of Life for Little Learners with your favorite Bible nerd, R.A. Sweeney. Today, I want to talk about the Hebrew word for God. And we're actually going to learn a few different words here because it gets used in a few different ways throughout the Bible. At the root, we have a word for God that is Eloah. Eloah. Can you say it? Eloah. Eloah. Eloah means God. And it is used in the way that we would typically use the word God itself. So if I were to refer to the God of the Bible, he is an Eloah. If I were to talk about, if I'm talking about like Greek mythology or Norse mythology, like Thor is the god of thunder, he would be an Eloah. So that's kind of the root idea that we're working off of is Eloah. A lot of times, a lot more, I think, I haven't looked at the numbers, but I think a lot more than we see the word Eloah, it just gets shortened down to L in the same way hello gets shortened down to hi. So L gets used a lot more commonly, but L just is short for Eloah. And in both cases, it means God. And you'll notice that God is singular there. We also see way more than Eloah is Elohim. And El can be short for Elohim as well, but Elohim is just the plural for God. So it means multiple, more than one. So if I were to say the gods of Mount Olympus, it would be the Elohim of Mount Olympus. And so it's just making it plural instead of a singular there. So we've got Eloah is one God, can be shortened down to El. Elohim is lots of gods, or multiple gods, also could be shortened down to El, depending on how it's used. When we look at how the word, I'm going to stick with Elohim because that's the most common way that I see it in the Bible. When I look at how Elohim is used, it gets used in a lot of different ways and referring a lot of different things. So I mentioned like the Olympian gods in Greek mythology or the Norse gods. And so we do see the same sort of thing where it's talking about the gods of the nations surrounding. So there's the gods of Egypt, there are the gods of Babylon and Assyria, and all the surrounding nations have their gods, and they get referred to as Elohim. Now, depending on how you're reading the scriptures, some people are going to say, oh, well, it's talking about fictional characters. So those aren't real gods. So it's talking about, like the Egyptians would call their made-up gods, they'd call them gods. And that could be the case. But there's enough language in the Bible that suggests that maybe they are real. Not that they are anywhere to be compared with the God of the Bible, but it's a real thing. A lot of people have connected him with like the demons of the New Testament and things like that. But we could be talking about those. So it could be the pagan gods. Excuse me. But we also see other types of Elohim that the Bible in no way makes... in no confusing language says these are real creatures. So we see angels, which is just a Greek word for messengers. So we see God's messengers all over the place. Like they visit Mary, they visit Daniel, they visit Abraham, they visit Jacob. Like they're all over the place in the Bible. We've got these messengers running around doing things for God. They're referred to as Elohim. So if we were to literally translate that, we would say they use the word for gods. Again, not the same as the God of the Bible, but the Hebrew uses the same word to describe them. Then we see like cherubim, like they guard the entrance back into Eden. They carry God around it on his storm chariot, like at the beginning of Ezekiel. In Isaiah, he has a vision where he's in the heavenly temple, and there are seraphim, which are flaming like serpent dragon type things. There's a lot of different things that get used in this word Elohim. So Elohim, I translate as spiritual beings rather than gods, because to me, if I say all these things are gods, that sounds very polytheistic, and I don't like that. But it is the same word. So I translate it as spiritual beings. So the angels are spiritual beings in the way that I'm a material being. And I feel like that kind of alleviates a lot of the confusion with how those things are, that they're spiritual beings, they're not the same as God. Um, but the Bible it doesn't differentiate God in terms of like what he's made of. He fits in that category of spiritual beings. God is a spiritual being. The New Testament even affirms that, where it talks about God being spirit. So he is a spiritual being in the same way that angels are spiritual rather than material. He exists in the spiritual realm is kind of what this is all referencing. It's not saying he's the same, but he is an inhabitant of the same sort of space. And God always gets referred to in the plural. And so earlier, rather than saying lots of gods, I said a whole bunch of God, because I feel like that's what it's trying to imply, is like you've got this one figure that is so much God that he needs a plural to describe him. And that's where I feel like the difference between God being an Elohim and angels being Elohim and the pagan gods being Elohim is it's not in what they are. They're all inhabitants of the spiritual realm, but God is so big, he even needs to be plural just to be described. Like he's so much more. He's so much above. And so when I've kind of been working through Genesis 1:1 a little bit. In the beginning we talked about, then the creation that God does, or the setting in order. And then the next word is God, because they don't mix up, but they have a different word ordering. So you get the verb before the noun. So in the beginning, creation was done by Elohim. And we're kind of left to figure out in that passage, is it a whole bunch of gods that did this together, or is it the one God who is so vast, he gets described in the plural? And as we look, we find out that it is the one God who is so vast that he needs to be described in the plural. But it uses sort of ambiguous language so that we can then explore and we can find out. Because any person in like the ancient Near East, if I said, in the beginning Elohim created, they'd be like, well, who are you talking about? And so it's an invitation to then start looking and exploring, like, oh, this is not a whole bunch of gods. This is one God who's so big, he needs to be described in the plural. I want to know, and look at what he's doing. Like, this is pretty cool. I want to know more. So it's used in a sort of ambiguous language to then invite you to explore, like, who is this spiritual being? This spiritual being isn't like the rest of the spiritual beings, and I want to know more. So that's the word Elohim that we see in the Bible, or Eloah in the singular, or El for short, that is used to describe spiritual beings or gods. And of course, Elohim describing our God, the God of the Bible, the one that is bigger, greater, more powerful than all the rest of the spiritual beings. So I hope that was a blessing. Tune in next time as we continue exploring some of the Hebrew and Greek language in the Bible. Thanks, everyone.